Welcome to the Thought Leader Podcast. Get ready to hear powerful stories, unique perspectives, and bright ideas to impact the world in the areas of health, wealth, and relationships. We interview experts, authors, executives, entrepreneurs, and other industry thought leaders who share new strategies, practical tools, and best practices to accelerate your personal and professional results. This is the Thought Leader Podcast. And now, here's your host, Elena Fernandez.
Well, hello everyone to the Thought Leader Podcast. Today, I have a gorgeous and amazing guest, and you are going to love her. You're in for a treat. Her name is Nicole Sartini. She's a psychotherapist, speaker, writer, and listen to this, authentic empowerment guide. I love that. So let's talk, Nicole. Let's just get right into it. How are you doing today? And welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah.
I feel great.
Oh my gosh. So I understand that you started in the mental health field 23 years ago at the age of 19. I need to hear about that. We all need to hear about this.
Yes, it's officially over half of my life that I have been immersed and passionately immersed in this work. And I've only been a professional therapist, I should clarify, since 2010. But I started in the field at 19, working at a place called St. Joe's Children's Home with kids who had been removed from their homes because of abuse or neglect. And just fell in love with the act of being part of somebody's healing journey, and also all the learning that comes, all the receiving that comes from having the privilege of being a part of somebody's learning journey. And it wasn't until I was a little bit old, like I said, though, and I had my son. I was pregnant with my son when I started thinking about maybe turning it into like more of a professional career. And I decided in my own therapist's office to become a therapist myself. And because I was like, this is really empowering to be able to more deeply understand the way that we respond to the situations in our lives in such varied ways, because the kind of things that would upset me and the things that would upset you might be very different. And that's because we have our own unique histories and our own unique sensitivities and our own unique sets of things that we've had to overcome or move through. And that was fascinating to me. And anyway, yeah.
Wow. And you've been practicing since 2010.
Yes, and actually ended up opening, I think you probably saw my a group practice in 2015.
Yeah.
And that is called Bridge Counseling and Wellness, and we do integrative mental health. So what happened was I met another clinician in this group called, it was Mindfulness Contemporaries, therapists who used mindfulness as part of their work. And what Juniper, my business partner, and I realized is that we both also use things like movement and nutrition and meditation as part of our own healing repertoire, because this is an ongoing process for all of us. We're always in new stages of our own evolution and our understanding ourselves more deeply, and we really related over that. And we decided to do it, to open a group practice. We have free yoga, we have free meditation classes, and nutritional consulting for our clients, so that they get more of like a whole self, holistic kind of experience. Yeah.
That's amazing. And you call it an integrative approach to mental health. I love that. How is it different from other approaches out there?
So when we started it, what we noticed was that even though Juniper and I, who were very much like invested in our own mental health and our own particular, unique paths of healing that we were going down, were using these extra tools, that they weren't necessarily being used in clinical settings. In fact, when we first started talking with our beloved friends from this group, they thought perhaps we were out of our scope of practice. And that was completely valid for them to bring that up, because we weren't seeing it used in a lot of places. So what we decided to do was to really go deep into the research and comb through to figure out is this something that is actually valuable to do in the therapy office? And what we found was, in fact, it was. And we went to all the mental health boards and we got approval for a training that we created called 3-Core Integrative. So now mental health professionals can get a certification to know in integrative mental health, to know that they actually are coming at it from a board approved point of view, and so that it is completely acceptable, because we really wanted to be ethical, of course, and we needed to understand where those limitations were and where were we not pushing the boundaries enough. Because if we're trying to make change in the world in any form, it requires some people to step outside the box a little bit and to push up against what the norms are. That's how change happens. And so we were very interested in doing that and being a part of that. And we're really glad we did, because it's become more normalized now. And there's actually a few places, even in our city now, who also offer free yoga to their clients. And that wasn't the case before. And we think it's cool, because we want to have an influence that's meaningful and actually caters to a larger variety of people, because not everybody just benefits from only talk therapy. And so this allows other options. And another way that it's different is that we have like art therapists, and we have wilderness therapists. We have like a wide variety of alternative kind of approaches, and we're kind of known for that in our city. We have we have 5 locations right now, and a team of 60. And so like we're kind of pretty well known in our local community as the place to go if you want something a little outside the box, and we love that.
I love that. So people tell everyone where your office is, and also they can work with you as a speaker, right? Anywhere in the world.
Oh, that's true. The office is in Louisville, Kentucky, but I did just I'll tell you what happened was the business has become very successful, and that has opened up some freedom for me to really delve into how can I serve the greater good to the best of my ability while still honoring and respecting myself. That's one of my personal mottos. I want to serve the greater good to the best of my ability while still honoring and respecting myself. And with the time that I have been lucky enough to have, now that the business is kind of running like a well-oiled machine, and there's other people in those leadership positions, and I have this freedom to really like reflect on all these years of working so closely with people like that. And I found patterns. I'm starting to see like patterns that like it's like a special window into the world that I feel like I carry after 23 years. I'm 43. And since I was 19, so like that's like a lot of time working closely. And I saw some places, some patterns that I think if I can find a way and build some skill around articulating with practice and consistency, that I can be of service, and I've been on just the one-on-one, and kind of expand that in a way that I also really enjoy, because I do love being on stages and things like that.
Yes. Oh, it's so fun.
Yes.
And so meaningful for people. I know that as a speaker, you're very gifted and connect with the audience in a very meaningful way. So I'm really excited for people to learn how to work with you in that capacity. But I want to ask you though, because on your website, which is NicoleSartini.com, just like your name, I saw that your mission statement and the offerings that you have on there, they're all geared to what I was teasing the audience about, our listeners and viewers today, authentic empowerment, and that importance of connecting with your truest and deepest self. So I want you to please share with everyone, including myself, what do you mean by authentic empowerment? What is your own definition of that? And where did it come from?
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll tell you that it came from, I'll start with that part. It came from this opportunity that I had to just reflect on what I've been doing and on my own personal healing journey. Kind of put those together and like kind of identify some places that it just became really evident that there's an underlying theme that all of us experience various forms of conditioning through our families, our environments, our culture, our society. And over time, our most authentic truth, our soul blueprint, so to say, like so to speak, what we really have to offer and share with the world, kind of gets hidden underneath that influence. And sometimes the ways that we're conditioned are actually, they actually match, and it's okay and it fits. But I think it's especially empowering for people to be able to know what might be kind of covering up their truest selves, and just make some maybe like in some ways an educated decision about whether that really fits for them or not, and to find what lies at the real center of their being. Because your highest expression and my highest expression look completely different, because that authentic truth within us is different. If I try to match what you're doing and do it exactly like you, I'm always going to fall short, because I'm not meant to be you, I'm meant to be me, and vice versa. And so relieving ourselves from that conditioning, because it's part of being a human, we're going to keep discovering more about ourselves that we want to uncover and either let go of or make a choice to keep. Like, those are all ongoing processes. And I know I'm being a little long-winded, but there's actually like 5 guideposty kind of things. So if you don't mind me sharing those, I would love to say what they are, because this is the pattern piece. The first one, and I made this term up. It's parallel sovereignty. So these are some keys to authentic empowerment. Parallel sovereignty. So sovereignty, as just in case anybody isn't aware, is just the sense of taking, like, from my mind, is taking the sense of full responsibility for our own healing, our own growth, and our own gifts. Because no matter how much we might want to be rescued from our situation, or we might want to rescue someone else from their situation, the best we can do is fan each other's flames and support one another, because ultimately this is a solo journey. Nobody could have walked through the difficult things I had to get through and experience the joy I have, and same for you. And that's the case for any of us, but we're doing it in parallel. We're not really alone doing it, but everybody has their alone journey. So that's the idea of parallel sovereignty, accepting that full responsibility. I'm going to lump these together just for the sake of time, because there's 3 in the middle that are like basically accepting the fullness of things. Accepting the fullness of our emotion, accepting the fullness of ourselves, the parts we like, the parts we don't like, and the reality that, like, those are all part of us and need love and acceptance to some degree as we tend to them, and in sincerity about the fact that they actually exist so that we can tend to them as we want to. And also accepting that change and that challenge is inevitable. So accepting that emotions are going to go up and down, and that there's actually some worth, even in the dips. Because if you think of it like a circle, when we're at our highest spot, this is wonderful. Joy leads us to, like, we know we're aligned when we're in a space of joy. That's wonderful. But when we dip down into those lower spots, that's when we get into shadow. We learn more about ourselves, and we can understand ourselves more deeply, and we can bring healing, and then we can bring it back up to those good moments. So it all has value. All the emotions have value. The aspects of self we can't separate from. It's just our reality. We all have those harder to tend to parts, and parts we enjoy more. And then challenge being inevitable. And the last one is experiencing oneness. I know that sounds really hippie, and I guess I'm a little like that, a lot like that, because there's, beneath all these like characters we play in the world, if we go back far enough, there's a place where we all connect. We are ourselves, but we're also part of this universe, no matter what. We are just as much part of this collective as we are ourselves. It's just that we identify with ourselves a lot more. But we're like a fingernail and a hair, and, like, we're all part of the whole. And so honoring and taking that in can kind of keep us from being so defensive and just needing to justify everything, and like needing to be the best. It's because everybody's beautiful in their own way. And so that, I think, is a very crucial, helpful element. I know that was a lot, but anyway, hopefully you followed some of that.
Oh, absolutely. It was great. I think there's so much to unpack there, because I really love how you brought your life's work into these 5 aspects, and you bring it down to just 5 different things that we can all work on that we can all kind of discover and reflect on our own. But I also know that you have talks and workshops where you guide people through, okay, don't just know it and do it on your own, but here are some exercises and tools and strategies. So I really love that you have this available. And who is the right audience to benefit from this type of setting?
Sure. Yes. Well, I think anyone could benefit to some degree for sure. But I find that it's especially good for people who have histories of people pleasing or having a lot of interpersonal struggles or or maybe who have allowed themselves to be in situations that have become really unhealthy and are trying to figure out, why did I do that? How did that happen? Let me kind of like backtrack and see what of these areas could I maybe tend to a little bit. And in some ways, understanding these concepts, I believe, really does protect us from things like, manipulation, or from like distraction, being distracted by, oh, what are people going to think of this? There was a point in my life where I would just play over what I said when I didn't think I said something well, or that I might have said it in a way that was hurtful. I remember spending so much time just like replaying things and wondering, what if I should have done that, and should I, and like I've been able to eliminate that and use that energy and that time for other things. And like, that's like empowering, right? To be able just to say, now when someone, or when I experience like a thing where like, oh, I made a mistake, what I can do is I can just like I don't see it as like, oh, bad, good, what. I just say, ooh, okay, there's a learning spot. Let me bring love and acceptance to the emotion that's coming up around it. Let me tend to that for a minute. Let me allow it to move through without over attaching to it or pushing it away, and just accept that that's part of the human experience, and then move on
Yeah.
with a new insight, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you're sharing a little bit about what you have been through, because I know that a lot of people have kind of a different path to this mental health career, right? Like you've been doing it intuitively, and because of your lived experience, then you turn that into the professional aspect of your work. And can you tell us about your lived experience as much as you can share with our audience? Because I know that it matters for people. Sometimes we feel a disconnect, like, what do you know about this? You haven't been where I've been. So it's really important for me to highlight that you have lived experience, that you've done this work yourself, that you really are someone that can understand this type of issues for anyone. So when Nicole's talking about people pleasing, is because she is an expert in this matter, and right. So tell us
Oh
about.
yeah, it's not. I'm not. There are different ways to experience life. There's a mental, like intellectual way, and
Yeah.
there's an embodied way, an an experiential way, and that's I'm into that. I'm into that, and I'm also into being really open about it, for the very reason that I believe that, to get heavy for a second, things like people dying by suicide, for instance. Talking with people who are the survivors of these people through my work, for instance, hearing a lot of things like they never felt like they could tell anyone. They didn't feel like they could. And so I'm helping. And what part of how you find that pattern is like, well, that's because we don't normalize the fact that actually everybody struggles sometimes. So people like me, and I have a successful business, I'm confident, and I'm outspoken in that. But like I've had like just like everybody, I have ups and downs within that. And yes, the baseline has very much risen over the years. But yes, I'll say a little bit about my history, because you asked. I did grow up in. I want to be. I don't feel comfortable giving all the details, but I grew up around violence, addiction, um, infidelity, experienced sexual trauma, um, all those things, in childhood. And then also experienced further trauma. And I believe because of the vulnerabilities I carried by being empathic to a degree that was disrespectful to myself, like to the degree where I was not willing to see flaws in other people and could only see them in myself. And so when I had a conflict, I would just say, well, what could I do differently? What could I do? Now, this is, like you said, everybody has different paths to getting here. But for me, the authentic empowerment route was also part of me backtracking. How did I end up in the situation I was in as an adult? Where I didn't realize the way that I was being treated was not something I had to continue being part of or take full responsibility for. So that's where the parallel sovereignty piece comes in. I couldn't separate myself from that person. I felt responsible for that person's well-being, and I, in some ways, wanted that person to be responsible for me, to be honest, because I brought my own unhealthy into that situation too.
Thank you for sharing that, Nicole, and being vulnerable with our audience. Really appreciate that. And I really resonate with what you were sharing. I definitely can relate to a lot of it. I really love when you talked about the parallel sovereignty, because I really see that even though you didn't choose to be in this environment as a child, then you could choose to get out of that environment as a conscious adult. What are some barriers that you think prevent us from exercising that parallel sovereignty that you talk about? And how did you think that was unlocked for you?
Okay, I think that I think the biggest barrier is that culturally we are taught that we're responsible for each other's emotions inherently. And I'll be honest, there are times when I even catch myself saying things to my daughter like that I'm like, well, does that make, I don't want her to think that she's responsible for somebody's feelings, but I also want her to be polite. There's such like a fine line with those things. But
Yeah.
overall, and especially for women, it seems, there's this idea that, we are to be of service, we are to be kind, we are to be loving. And honestly, I enjoy being that role. I enjoy doing that. I think a lot of people do. But when it comes to where it's no longer a mutually respectful thing, that can be an issue. Or when we really do believe that somebody else is responsible for or even their approval is responsible for our well-being, then we set ourselves up to be dependent on something outside of ourselves for our own sense of worth. And while it's wonderful to be celebrated, and it's so nice when people see us and understand us, it feels amazing when that happens. But it's very important that we cultivate that sense of self-approval, that sense of self-love, so that what we receive on the outside is just the cherry on top. And we actually are able to carry and fulfill that need first and foremost within ourselves. You know what's interesting? The more work that I've done with that, it seems like, it doesn't seem like, it is true that the things that would have hurt me before, I'm open-minded to like things like, well, maybe it's this or maybe it's that or who knows. And then I let it go instead of being so sure that this was meant to be hurtful and this is, like accepting that the mind thinks it knows sometimes, but it only knows what it thinks it knows.
Yeah.
And so like, there's just so many ways to come into parallel sovereignty and that we do that. But like, it's the idea of accepting that, essentially we can cultivate a self-love within ourselves that really does help empower us.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. It makes sense. Authentic empowerment, right? And I think that when you talked about talking to your daughter and that fine line, I also resonated because I also have daughters. I have four of them, and raising empowered daughters, it's a really hard to do in this society. So for those people who are listening, who are parents or maybe are leaders of young people in the workplace, what do you think is a way to help them understand this concept of parallel sovereignty and
Parallel sovereignty.
yeah, and And do you speak to groups about this as well?
I do speak to groups about it, and I one thing that I think if there's just one little key takeaway for talking with children about this stuff is teaching them to listen inward. So they do need to take their brains aren't fully developed till 25. They need a lot of feedback from us. We have to guide them. We have to offer them. I mean, of course we do, obviously. But one way we can guide them is to also teach them how to tap into their own intuition, into their own perceptions. What do you think? How do you feel? And then in adulthood, or in perhaps we could even say like the teenage years and on, instead of like coming at things like, I'm going to give you this information and you can do it and then you do a good job. Instead of that, coming at it from pulling the ideas from them to help them experience their own strength and their own wisdom and their own insight so that they can build some muscle around self-trust. Like the ability to kind of know that you can, at one hand, trust what you're intuiting, trust what you're experiencing, and also be open to the possibility that you might feel an emotion as a fact when it really isn't. Both of those. It's like teaching them a balance of that. And obviously, human developmental stages aren't going to allow for very in-depth teaching of that. But there are at certain ages, but there are very subtle cues and ways that we can model ourselves doing that too. Like, let me feel. What feels right in this situation? Like even that kind of modeling can be really healthy for our younger ones.
I love that. Yeah, because I think it's a great aspect of mentorship for people that work with youth, not only in schools or maybe in the workplace, many people that are in internship or entering the workplace, the workforce from college. I really love that you brought that element in there. And many parents, I'm sure, are very grateful for this tip.
Well, also just remembering that like they are not going to offer the same thing to the world as you do. We all are our unique expressions. We're all unique expressions. And like, so accepting that you're helping them figure out what's their truth, where they are authentically empowered. And that's why I pull in that word authentic is because we're like, our culture may say that making this much of money or having this kind of job or having a marriage or doing this is what then you're okay. And so that might not actually be the value for everybody on this planet. I mean, it and so it's silly for us to think that there's it's not worthwhile to just assist in the self-discovery process for the people that we do have mentorship opportunities to serve.
Yeah, I love that so much. Oh my gosh. And you talked about emotions and now that we're in that realm of conversation, I would like to explore something that you mentioned also in the beginning about when someone finds it challenging to be with difficult emotions or experiences or those aspects of themselves that you said are sometimes hard to accept. How would you, as a therapist, help them learn how to work with that or facing those things, those emotions, that fear, or those aspects and experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would say there are a lot of different levels or stages of that experience. And by the way, some people are further along in one area and not, it's not a better or worse kind of judgment type language I'm trying to use around there, but sometimes language falls short. Um, I I usually start with something that pulls in what we know about the mind, because most people are able to access that space of consciousness. We can think. In fact, our culture really, really, really encourages that. Like that's what's celebrated and venerated in our culture. So it's usually an easy access point. And so if we have just maybe 3 or 4 minutes, I could teach a little exercise that I sometimes do. Would that be useful?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be amazing. Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Thought Leader Podcast. At Thought Leader, we help experts, authors, executives, and entrepreneurs land the most credible and authority-building stages in the world to spread their message and their impact. If that's you, visit thought-leader.com and click on Schedule a Session to get started. Now back to this episode of the Thought Leader Podcast.
So go ahead and share this exercise. I can't wait.
For sure. Okay, so I call it just a 5-step exercise, and I pull it from multiple different theories, kind of come together like mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy. But the first step is to identify what it is that you're feeling. We call it emotional differentiation. So instead of just rushing away from something as soon as we recognize that we feel bad, before we even know what we're exactly feeling, giving it enough time, some mindfulness to determine what exactly is it that we're feeling. Are we feeling embarrassed? Are we feeling resentful? Are we feeling, whatever it is, can you differentiate it a little bit more from just bad? Can you stay with it long enough to do that? Second step is to identify where is it in my body. It's really interesting. There's so many chemical responses that happen in the body when we are experiencing an emotion. Some people might feel it in their throat or their chest. Their jaw might get tight. Maybe the stomach starts hurting. If the stomach starts hurting, for example, digestion shuts down in our system when we're in fight or flight. So there's so many reasons that these things happen, but it also helps us to just tap in and be mindful enough to identify what is it I'm feeling and where is it in my body. The third step is to own it as yours in a self-compassionate way. Somebody else could be in the same exact situation as you, and they might feel differently. And that is good news, because that means you have some authority over what you do with that emotion. However, it is imperative that we have self-compassion while recognizing that, because the learning centers in the brain the learning centers in the brain actually shut down when we're in spaces of shame, and we can't actually make change anyway. So it's very important that we come at it from a place of self-compassion while we're taking that ownership. The fourth step is to connect what we're feeling with a thought. And this is where it gets, in my opinion, very interesting in the research. There is a fatty substance called myelin that coats neural pathways that are used frequently. So the more we practice thinking in a particular way, the better we get at it, the more quickly that happens. There's literally like your brain changes to make your brain fire based on that cue more frequently in that direction. So we identify what is the thought that I have connected to this feeling. And in session, we would have, person actually use an example, but say for, since we're right here, someone's feeling worthless. They're feeling like, oh, when I was treated this way, now I feel worthless. And so the thought is, I'm worthless, or people think I'm worthless, or whatever it is, an example. So you take that thought, and for step 5, you shift it over to something that's more empowering, but still believable, because you can't form that new neural pathway if you don't actually believe what you're telling yourself. So this is where pop psychology kind of gets it off a little bit, where they're like, just say you're a goddess in the mirror if you want to feel good. Well, if you're feeling pretty close to a goddess, that might actually be awesome, and it might really work. But if you're feeling worthless, your brain's not going to believe that, and it's going to be arguing with itself, and you can't form that new neural pathway. So instead, what we do is we take a stair step over, and we say something like, I might be wrong that I'm worthless, or I'm open to the possibility that I'm not worthless. And that becomes the first replacement thought if somebody's at that level. Now, of course, this changes in range for everybody's experience, but we try to take it over as far as we can to where someone can feel more empowered with the new thought and also believe it. And over time, we can continue that stair step further and further and further until maybe they do feel like a goddess when they look in the mirror. So yeah, that's one example of how people can work through it. And of course, there's also this element of not over attaching or pushing away emotions that I mentioned earlier, and learning how to not see them as more powerful than us, and how like adding an element of resisting like kind of makes whatever you're already experiencing heavier. So kind of accepting that, like, okay, this is what I'm feeling now, and allowing yourself to have that experience is another way I would I would work with people on those things. And we do some of these exercises, some versions of these exercises in some of my workshops. But of course, there's a lot more than just that.
Yeah, I love that so much, and especially that little reframe that you gave us about the positive affirmation and the self positive talk, because I think that it's clarifying for many people that maybe have tried it and it hasn't worked, and now they can understand why. That it's really eye-opening for many people, I'm sure.
And there's something else along the line that I would love to mention that's relevant to this. There's also this idea, if the listeners aren't familiar with brain priming, which they probably aren't, when you're so immersed with it, you forget sometimes. So brain priming is when it's this idea that what you kind of expect to see, you see more of. So if you keep your eyes open to the possibility of change, or you're open to the possibility of change, it's going to be really hard to make an exercise like that effective for you if you're not open to the possibility of change. So sometimes we even have to start there, like helping people get open to the possibility and prime their brains for the possibility that there is an ability to shift and change. And it's called brain priming. There's that study that there were these basketball players. It was done in the 70s, and the research participants were asked to count how many times the players passed the ball back and forth within that thing. And in the middle of that passing back and forth of the ball, somebody came out in a gorilla suit and was like banging their chest for like 10 seconds or something. And when the researchers asked the participants if they saw that, like 98% didn't see it because they weren't expecting to see it, you see? So like we have data that suggests that this is actually really, it's more than just like these, it's not just like a woo-woo, as they say, concept. This is actually like a real thing based in actual science. And it lends itself to authentic empowerment because it's a tool that we can use to understand what's happening here and be a supervisor of our mind instead of just letting it pull us around,
Yeah.
and like, so.
I love that so much. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've seen that video. I think it's called selective attention test. And yeah, I did not see it at first, because I was just focused on the ball, and it's so interesting.
Well, then
Yes.
when you expect to see it, you saw it, right? So that's what was so cool. Like all you have to do is expect to see it. It's not all you have to do. I know it's more complicated. We're making it sound like more simple just for the sake of the conversation, but it is also in some ways kind of simple. It's a very effective tool. Just to get to a space where you're open to the possibility that you can shift or that things can become easier
Yeah.
is so important.
Yeah, it's a very easy first step. I love that. And when you were talking about, that openness, I know that in your writing you always mention surrender. Is that the same, or what do you mean by surrender?
I think with surrender, I don't mean surrender as in give up. I can tell you that. I don't mean surrender be like, oh, well, I guess life's just going to take me where it's going to take me. That's not the way I mean it, even though I know it can be used that way colloquially. When I talk about surrender, I mean accepting the flow of life's experience. Like these ups and downs, these parts we find easy to like and more challenging to like, these emotions are all literally our ticket to being a human. And there's some power in just, all right, I'm on this ride. I think of it, I'm just now thinking about, because you do the positive mom work, I think about it almost as that point in childbirth where like you're like, okay, if anyone here has had natural birth, I just was interested in doing that and did that with both my children, and I was very lucky that I got to. But like there was a point in that process where I was resisting the pain, resisting the pain, resisting the pain, resisting it, and then finally I was just like, okay, and my body opened up, and I was able to give birth. And I know not everybody can relate to that particular example, but if you can imagine that, I think that's sort of what I mean. Like we are human, we are whole. We are imperfect, and so is every single person around us. And we don't have to, but we benefit and empower ourselves and others when we're able to offer grace to both ourselves and other people, and to understand that everybody has these different, unique paths that they're moving through, and that in some ways we're surrendering to the idea that we're sharing a world with people who have different experiences, different ways of doing, like, and just kind of just, okay, this is what we're doing, and settling into that instead of just resisting, and learning how to work with it and flow instead of fighting it.
Yeah, I really love that. And I love that you mentioned the word grace, especially for ourselves first and then for others, because I think that that's definitely key in order to, for all of the other pieces to come together. That's fantastic. I love this conversation so much, and I love your work and your presence. And like I said, one of the things that I admire about you is that you have this lived experience, that you have this expertise, that you've done the work, and you also have been with people in so many aspects of their lives, in so many of their experiences. So you have a very holistic view, but also a holistic approach to healing as a psychotherapist and also as an authentic empowerment guide. So I don't want to leave this conversation without asking two things. Number one, first, is if you had to leave the audience with something about what it means to be a thought leader and why you want to be a thought leader in this day and age. And then we're going to talk about how they can find you. But first, thought leader.
Sure. Yeah, I think a thought leader is somebody who is able to be courageous enough to allow their wholeness to be seen, and to accept and understand with sincerity that we're never going to be at the space where any of us know everything and are 100%. So if we're trying to get in a spot where we're, this is me and I know this, and it's not about putting your flag in and I know this. It's more about allowing your insight to unfold, and to understand that it's always going to be unfolding. And just like if we look back at ourselves 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we're like, wow, we've come a long way. That's going to keep happening. And so there's no need to feel like we know everything now. It's okay for us to continue to practice sharing what we know, and pushing with tenderness and grace boundaries until, like, we can expand in a way, like both our own personal consciousness and the consciousness of the collective. But I think that there's something I want to add along these lines when you were talking about grace that I feel is really important. And you mentioned the stories, and I answered that because, like, that is a part of my history, and I know sometimes people do want to know those things. But if we stay in a space of victimhood because of our experiences, we can only get so far with our healing. And I would never judge anybody for feeling in spaces of anger, as long as they need to experience it or whatever, if they've had some of these similar kind of experiences. But what I've found the most empowering is to truly be able to experience forgiveness, and being able to see that when people, like, that thing that people say, like, hurt people, like, nobody's a baby and then decides, I'm going to be harmful to my wife one day. Like, that's not how it works. And while we have to draw boundaries, and it is so important that we respect when we feel the call or need to change environments or something like that is definitely very important. And we're not required to stay in a space of right, wrong, bad, good, judgment and hate. Like, that's in fact a barrier for, I think, a lot of people. When I've read a lot of the literature on some of the things that I've went through, I find that there's a tone that kind of in some ways demonizes, like, people who cause harm. And I have this thing where I see people from, like, their child self, or through what's underneath that conditioning. And while I have made changes, and I do have relationships that I have boundaries with, I also deeply, truly have love in my heart for those people. And I think that that's a really cool place to be able to get. So don't limit yourself to just like, okay, well, I'm gonna get the situation, I'm gonna heal from. Okay, that's cool. What if you can learn how to love and learn how to be a being of love in situations and in circumstances where you would have every right not to do that? What does that feel like? How does that feel? So once we talk about healing, guess what? After healing happens, there's more ability to continue growth and feeling love for those who've caused harm while still learning how to have healthy boundaries is incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend it to thought leaders who want to be emotional thought leaders and serve the collective to the best of their ability while still honoring and respecting themselves.
Oh, I so endorse that message. +1. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's definitely the most expansive place to be, and where you truly serve humanity is coming from that place and for forgiveness that you talk about. Thank you for sharing.
And then thank you. And then should the moment come where you need that same kind of, you're more able to offer it to yourself. The more we're able to offer it to ourselves, the better we can do it for others. The more we do it for others, the more we can do it for ourselves. And if we're all doing that collectively on our own paths of parallel sovereignty, we become a more empowered collective, a more authentically empowered collective.
I love that. Thank you so much. So tell us the question that everybody has been waiting for. Where can they find you? And of course, we're going to add all the links to the show notes, but where do you want them to follow you right now or to connect with you? Because I'm sure that everyone who's listening and watching right now is just as mesmerized with your wisdom and your insights as I am.
Oh, thank you, Elena. I would say try my website, NicoleSartini.com, and NicoleSartini.com. And also, I have a little thing on Instagram called Edenside Sanctuary. I have a side thing where I host community gatherings at my home on the regular, and I call my home Edenside Sanctuary because I didn't mention, I'll be really quick, I didn't mention this part, but I was on food stamps, passport. I slept on, I had a one-bedroom apartment when I was going through school, and now my business became successful. I have a beautiful home, and I built a backyard stage so that I could share it with the community. And on this Saturday, for instance, we're having a community talent show. So like we do things like that on the regular, and it's so much fun. But I still put some of my writing and some of my blogs and stuff on that site too. It's Edenside Sanctuary on Instagram, or NicoleSartini.com would probably be the best.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that we had the honor to be with you today. And thank you everyone for tuning into the Thought Leader podcast. See you soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's it for today's episode of the Thought Leader Podcast. Visit our Thought Leader Talks YouTube channel to browse all episodes and show notes, and to continue the conversation. We love to hear your feedback, ideas, and success stories. And don't forget to subscribe for more expert information, insights, and inspiration. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Thought Leader Podcast with another relevant conversation you don't want to miss.